Joining me for a walk in the garden. It's mid-October, but you would never know it by the temperature. We've had a few days of extremely high temperatures for this season, which makes it a great time to work outside. I'm Liz Davey, and this is a walk in the garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Television. I'm in my herb garden. The wind is blowing the leaves off the trees very quickly. But we haven't had a frost yet, so we still have some annual things. My lemon verbena is still going strong. This will be killed almost immediately when we do have a killing frost, or even one that is semi-killing. The last time we were here, I took some samples for a soil test because I thought that this might need a little something, and I didn't know what it was. I sent it into the UMass Extension, and I already received my response through email. And they give you all kinds of information. I know that my pH here is 6.7. That means I don't need to put any lime on this ground for growing herbs. And they tell you the phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and all kinds of other things about your soil. What I did find out is that this particular plot is low in potassium. So next spring I will be adding something that is high in potassium. It could be wood ash, it could be green sand. There are several things, and they even tell you what they are and how much to add to bring it to a normal amount. I did find that my phosphorus, nitrogen, and magnesium and calcium were all higher than optimum. This comes from years of using fertilizer on the plot and probably natural compost as well. Therefore, I don't need to think about adding an all-purpose fertilizer, just a little potassium to this particular spot. They give you a lot of information, but the practical information actually tells you what to add and how to figure out that fertilizer package to get the most out of it without adding too much or too little of anything. Put this away. It's time to continue cutting things down. I've let this rose form rose hips. This will take it into the winter. It also adds a little winter color with the bright rose hips. But other things do need to be cut down. I have quite a bit of mint in this garden, and I'll just be snipping that to the ground and then raking it up with everything else. I don't rake until the end of the garden. We still have chives that are somewhat usable. They're small. Those, we won't do anything with those. They'll die back naturally. The southern wood will be left where it is. If you have rosemary in the garden and lavenders, leave those, don't cut them back. Other things can be cut back. And once these annuals go, which I thought would be by now, you can remove those completely. Anything that is not perennial should be removed in the fall, so you won't be confused in the spring expecting it to grow, and of course it will not. That pretty much concludes what we need to do in the herb garden. All it requires is some time and some clippers, and we'll get it cleaned up in the next month or so, especially after the first frost. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. We're in the perennial garden, and we still have a few green things and a few things still in bloom, but there are a number of things that have completely turned brown, and it's time to get those out of the garden. This one is salvia, and it's ready to be cut to the ground. And again, remove from the garden. I'll put this in the compost. It was a healthy plant. Unhealthy plants are best discarded with the trash so you don't spread problems. The perennial garden suffered quite a lot with the drought that we had recently, and a lot of things started to brown a little before frost. Now that we have this out of here, it's a good time also. You remember we put plant supports in the spring. I'll be removing those and putting them in a storage area for the winter so that we can rake out the garden. Again, once everything has browned off, we can cut most of the things back. I'll leave a few things that have good seeds for the birds. This is a eupatorium, and it has a white flower that blooms now. One of the things that gives a little color to the garden in the fall. These daisies, again, are gone. They do have some seed heads, and once the birds have completely eaten all of them, I'll take those out. There's still a few left, not very many though. The birds have done a number on them already. The next thing I want to do is plant tulips. It's time to plant bulbs. And I do keep a garden journal. In the spring when the bulbs were in bloom, I wrote down where I would need new bulbs for fall. I have quite a few bulbs, and once you have a good planting of spring bulbs, it's hard in the fall to figure out where exactly they were so that you can plant new ones. Today I'm going to plant some pink impression tulips. The impression tulips are ones that tend to come back for a few years. And we want to dig down fairly deep to plant these. Again, deep planting helps them come back. We have some lovely rocks. We need to get out of here. By planting the bulbs now, the roots will have time to form, and the bulb will be ready to go. Each bulb has stored within it the potential for its first year's bloom. So we're pretty well assured, unless something eats them, that we'll have a nice bloom next year. Cut roots as we go. Prior to planting them, I'm going to put in some bulb booster or fall fertilizer. This helps the bulbs a little bit. It contains some phosphorus. And I'm just going to put in a little bit, just dust a little bit in the bottom of the hole. Stir it into that bottom dirt. I like to plant bulbs in groups rather than single straight lines. I think it looks a little nicer, more like a bouquet. Tulip bulbs have roots on the bottom, and the pointy part is the part that goes up. And I'm going to put these in a little circle down deep in this hole. And I'm going to put about 5 in this group. I'll continue planting the rest of the package later, but now we'll fill in with the dirt. And with rain predicted tomorrow, these should be all set. Since I had mulched this garden earlier in the spring, I do have a little mulch left. Once I've planted the bulbs, I'll put some more mulch on top of them. But we want to snug them in there really well. And on top, I have grape hyacinths that come up. They spread, so I have quite a few of them. So what I'm going to do is dig down a little bit, and right in the middle of that clump, I'm going to put a few of the grape hyacinths. You'll notice they're green. Grape hyacinths put up foliage in the fall, which makes them a very good marker plant. They're a nice little short blue bloom in the spring, but because you have a piece of green foliage, you know exactly where they're planted. This will tell me that I've planted bulbs in this area if I add a few to each bulb planting. And it will let me know next fall that something has already been planted here. I don't know how many times I've dug down to plant bulbs and found bulbs already there, which you can put them back, but if you split them, that kind of takes care of the bulb and you have to get rid of it. Let's move down the garden a little bit and see some of the other things that are still in bloom. There are still a few perennials in bloom, and the end of them is coming close. This is an aster, a fall aster. This is pink dome. I also have purple dome, which are also in bloom. We still have a few annuals in here, but we did have enough of a frost or cool temperatures to blacken the top of the heliotropes, so they can come out anytime. The salvia, the annual salvia, is still going strong. The rose, I'm leaving to form rose hips. This tells the rose when it forms hips and goes to seed that it's time for winter to come, and it will hasten its dormancy a little bit. Sedums are now in bloom, and they've turned from the pale pink to a dark, dark red, and they will continue turning dark as the season goes on, eventually browning. I leave these up in the garden as long as possible because they are decorative. Also, I clip some of them and use in pots outdoors for Christmas decorations. They add a little texture to the evergreens that I put in the containers. We'll do that at another time. These are black-eyed Susans. Again, the birds love the seedlings. I will leave those alone for a while. You'll notice they form a basal set of leaves, and those I'll leave on. I'll just clip the top stalks when I rake up. It's time to find all your little garden decorative items and move them into shelter. My garden shed will be very full by the time I get everything in it this fall. Furniture, garden decorative items, plant supports, all kinds of things. But it's time now to start finding them before the leaves cover them up. Again, the leaves are falling at a good clip. We have gone over this yard at least once, and it will need it again. I also have a lot of pine trees. We use the leaves on the garden and also in the compost. Once they've been crunched up by the lawnmower, they work into the garden very nicely when it's tilled in the fall. And the pine needles are very nice to make paths. I believe in using what you have rather than shipping these things off to be burned or composted. I'd just as soon use them here and not have to buy materials for my paths and compost for my gardens. Again, the chrysanthemums are also still in bloom, and I have one small rose that's still putting out blooms. I guess those would be the last roses of summer. The peonies are starting to turn a darker color. Some of the perennial foliage is quite decorative as it turns different colors. But once it turns brown, it's time to get it down. Now let's go over to the vegetable garden. The vegetable garden still has a few things left. However, I have removed quite a few things too. Eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, all have come out of the garden. The supports have all been stored for the winter. All of the black plastic that I had under the plants has been discarded, and sometimes you can use it a second year, but this was its second year, so it's time to go and get new black and red plastic for next year. We still have a few things blooming, and the marigolds that I planted at the end of each row and the calendulas are giving us a full fall show. It's time to do some more planting, and that's garlic. October is the time to plant the garlic, and the garlic we harvested in August is what I'm going to plant for a crop next year, at least some of it. Each clove of garlic, or each head of garlic, has a variety of cloves. And what I'm going to do, I've dug a trench probably about 4 to 5 inches deep with the hoe, and I'm going to put these in about 6 inches apart, just break them off. Now some people, I guess, have used supermarket garlic, but it really is helpful if you buy seed garlic or use garlic that you've picked. Sometimes the grocery store items have been treated to prevent sprouting, and sprouting is exactly what we'd like this garlic to do. And again, about 6 inches apart. Be good spacing. Plant a couple of the cloves. Remove some of the fallen leaves. Again, the bottom of the garlic, where it attaches to the stem, is the part you want to put down. The pointy end goes up. Then we'll cover it over with soil. Again, with rain predicted for tomorrow, this will give it a good head start. I'm going to give it one extra step and put some compost on top of it to give it a really good start. And I'm just going to spread some as part of the fill back on it. We'll tamp it down. And the next step will be to mulch it with straw. Just a reasonably light coating of straw. We'll use some that we had mulched the garden with and rake it in over the garlic that's been planted. I'll continue this down the whole row. As far as I wish to plant garlic, probably about 2/3 of the row I will devote to garlic. It makes quite a lot of garlic to store over the season. And what I used to plant this year are the cloves that were a little loose on the head. Some of them are tightly folded, and those will keep a lot longer in storage. Now we still have things that can be picked in the garden. There's a little bit of lettuce, but it's going to seed pretty quickly. We definitely have beets, and some big ones. These are the golden beets. Very difficult to find in the grocery, but very nice to have. Plenty of parsley, both curled and single leaf, and if this weather holds and we don't have too much cold weather, we may have parsley, fresh parsley, to use in the Thanksgiving turkey stuffing. We'll see. If it gets really cold, then it will go as well. But don't pull it out, because the parsley will reemerge in the spring, and you'll have fresh parsley very quickly. Parsley is a biennial. It grows 1 year from the seeds, and then the second year it comes up again and goes to seed. So it has a 2-year cycle. I also have a few carrots, and I think I can pull a few of those. Yep. So this one's kind of a strange shape. There was a rock underneath. Let's see if we may need to loosen them with a spade. But we have some carrots. The root vegetables do pretty well in this weather. I do have some more beets down here. This is the plant called Piracicaba, which is a new one for me this year. And it forms these little broccoli type shoots. And I do pick off these as they grow. And Each plant produces tons of little small shoots. The leaves are also edible. I usually take off the larger ones. These can be sauteed, just lightly sauteed, and make a nice vegetable for fall. The other thing we have is still some of that perpetual spinach. And again, the leaves in the center are the ones that are the most tender. And I also have parsnips. Parsnips are best after a frost. I've got a short row of them. We like them. We particularly like them roasted. But I'm going to pick one now, and the rest will come up after we've had a hard frost. It tends to sweeten them. Let's see what we've got here. That one wasn't much of a parsnip. These two were very small, but you can see what a large root it has. Some of the others will be larger, I'm hoping. Still not extremely huge. Occasionally you will have larger ones. This is a more typical size of the parsnips. And again, scrubbing them and roasting them is really good. With the root vegetables, the use of a fork close to them but not right on them is helpful. I'm still getting regular broccoli too. And this forms heads, smaller ones. Again, after the first main head comes off of the plant, you get a lot of side shoots, and it's worth keeping the plants around and keeping them sprayed with whatever you use. I use Bullseye, which is an organic spray that deters the moths. I still soak it in salt water, but you'll get quite a few heads and quite a few meals. Once it goes to seed, it's not as good. That we'll put in the compost. Still have a few flowers for bouquets. Zinnias are still going, as are the nasturtiums, and even a couple straw flowers, which are just starting to bloom, and hopefully those can be taken inside for winter use. Also, we have some celery down here. And it looks just like grocery store celery. Most people don't know that you can grow it. Plants are available in the spring, and I usually put in about half a dozen, and that's enough. We take shoots off of it all summer to put in chicken salad, tuna salad, use in soups, stews, and this will go when it's frost, so I will get out here and pick it and refrigerate at least a couple heads of it so that we can use it a little later in the year. Now let's go over to the cutting table. These are the cuttings that we took earlier, last month, actually in August, and they've been growing in the pots and they've formed roots. But most of the pots have 2 or 3 different plants in them that have roots. And we need to get at least one of those out of there. So I'm going to repot them, and we will have more cuttings growing by repotting these. Add some potting soil, keeping them at about the same level where they were growing before. This gives the one that's in the pot room to grow. And we'll put these back. This one has 3, so we'll have 3 plants out of this one. These cuttings, I use the cutting powder, hormone powder, and just plunk them in pots with compost. I learned at the garden club meeting this fall another way to do propagation, and this is a thing called a Forsyth pot. And a Forsyth pot is a regular plastic nursery pot, and I put a piece of netting in the bottom of it to keep the perlite from going through. Perlite is this very much like vermiculite, this thin stuff, and I wet it down well, and then you put a regular clay pot in the middle, which has got its bottom corked with a piece of cork. After you've done that, you fill that center pot with water and put a plastic bag over the whole thing. And this will cause roots to form very quickly. I did use rooting powder, but these have rooted quite nicely, as you can see. And I've never had, some of the things that I've had problems rooting are rooting really well at this method. So it's another method to try. The nice thing about this is you can keep using that Forsyth pot forever, just taking out the plants and repotting them once they form roots. So we have yet another, and this is the pineapple sage, which is very tender outside, but I will have cuttings, hopefully, to plant out next year in my herb garden or perennial garden. Now let's check on the pond. This planter is still going pretty strong, albeit covered with leaves. And the blue flowers you see are the Plectranthus, and those are some of the cuttings that I took last year and potted and planted into this large planter. Also, we have the Tradescantia, the purple flower right here, purple leaves, and it will have a little blue flower. And then there's another Plectranthus over here. This is a ginger, and it grows like crazy inside all winter, and then I divide it into several pieces, and it adds some height to planters in the spring. I've already taken inside most of my outdoor plants. We'll let this one die down because I know I have cuttings to use for next year. Leaves, 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 all over leaves. Let's head back to the pond. The pond is still going. The fish are still swimming around and eating. The water temperature has not dropped below 50 degrees. But I have covered it with a net. As you can see, with lots of trees, we have lots of leaves. And we really don't want those to go into the pond itself. So I've netted the pond with a net, which I hold down with rocks. The first year I did it, I laid it flat across the pond, and a lot of the leaves kind of sunk down. I had an old sprinkler base, tripod, that the sprinkler died, but the base was still good. So I can put that in the pond and adjust its legs so it holds the net off the surface of the water. The second year I did this, I learned that unless I cover up that tripod, I get a hole in the net. So things evolve year by year when you're doing a garden. We do keep, I try to blow it off periodically. I notice I have a nice rock in there now, holding it down. Some leaves are still going to go into the pond, but not nearly as many as if I didn't have the net over it. I do keep the waterfall and filter going for another month probably, and depending on the weather. If it gets really cold, at that point I will pull everything out, and the fish will go into a semi-dormancy for the winter. They do stay in the pond. I'll put in a unit that keeps a hole in the ice so that the air, the gases that form from fish waste primarily, and also decaying leaves can escape from the pond, and they also have a source of oxygen. Many of the hostas are still green, and I'm leaving them in place until they turn brown. Some of them browned a bit when we had such dry weather, and those I can take out. This is a grass that grows, it's an oak grass that grows in the shade or semi-shade, and I'll leave that one up for winter interest. It'll turn a nice brown color and add a little winter interest, along with the other plants, the rhododendrons and leucothwae. We'll have a little bit of green in the garden all winter. Also, the ground covers stay somewhat green, the myrtle and of course the hellebores. So we will have some green as we go. The shed is going to hold a lot of things this winter. I will be removing anything that the mice might like particularly. and I will take in anything that might freeze. If I have chemicals in here, excuse me, they will all go into the house for the winter where it's warmer. I use a product called Mouse Magic. It's little like bags, and it's a mint product. They smell very minty, and the mice don't care for them. I prefer to use it instead of traps because you don't have to empty it. It just repels the mice, and they decide they don't want to live in the shed. So I put 3 or 4 of them in the shed. I keep some in there all the time. Once I close it up for the winter, I'll put in fresh ones, and in a small area, it works quite well. It's not always effective 100%, but it's pretty good. It's one of the best things I've found. And if you know where mice are getting in, certainly that's the place to put something like this. You do have to change it every 3 months, and I recommend that you put a date on it when you put it in the shed. That way you'll know when it's time to be changed. Again, a lot of changes out here, taking things in, putting things back in there. Now let's go inside and do some cooking. Today we're going to work with kale. Kale is a very nutritious vegetable, and it will stay out fresh in the garden for a long time, even after a frost. But eventually the time comes where it's covered with snow or it's gone, and you'd like to have some in the kitchen. You can buy frozen kale, and you can also freeze your own. And what I'm going to do with this kale is blanch it first. The reason you blanch vegetables for freezing is because the enzymes in the vegetables continue to cause the vegetable to ripen and ultimately to rot. And you don't want that to continue once you have preserved your vegetables. So this will deactivate any enzymes. I have a pot of boiling water, and I'm using my spaghetti cooker. And I'm just going to clump kale in here. And you'll see it sink into the water. I'm going to put the lid on, and we're going to let this boil in the boiling water for about 2 minutes. This kale I have already taken off the stem. I've washed it well. If you think there might be any insects in the kale, soak it in a strong salt solution and then rinse it good and check it carefully. I've taken the individual leaves off the kale and thrown away the stalks in the middle. Some people do use the stalks and put them in soup. I have enough kale that I just use the kale if I'm making soup. But we do want to let this stay in the boiling water with the lid on, and this will deactivate the enzymes without fully cooking the kale. That's our plan. Let's see how it's doing here. We need to stir it down a little. Make sure it's boiling. Okay, we have blanched the kale, and I'm going to lift it up. This is the nice part about using the spaghetti cooker. You can drain it right away. And now it's completely gone down in size, and I'll put it into a bath of ice water. I'm going to get all these pieces out. We want to make sure that it chills really quickly. This ends the blanching process, and this is true of every vegetable that you freeze. Once you've blanched it, you want it to completely chill in an ice water bath. Now at this point, I'm going to take it out of the ice water bath and put it into the basket of my salad spinner. We want it really dry, really dry when it goes into the freezer. Otherwise it clumps together. We want to avoid getting the ice cubes, but just get all the kale out. I'll spin it in the salad spinner. That should do it. We spun out quite a bit of water. Then I'm going to bring it over here and lay it out in a single layer on clean dish towels. We want it to dry even further. We want to make sure this kale is really dry before we put it in the freezer. And we'll leave it here, and once it is completely dry, and I'll probably end up putting another towel on top of it, or perhaps some paper towels. Spread it out. I did this for the first time last year because I did have such an abundance of kale. We really enjoyed it all winter. It takes a little while to do it, especially if you're doing multiple batches. But we'll make sure this is good and dry. And let's see, perhaps even throw another towel over the top. Pat it down. Again, you want the maximum dryness. We'll leave it there for a while. The next step will be to put it on a cookie sheet and put it in the freezer. And once it's frozen, it'll come off the cookie sheet. If it's dry, if it's wet, it won't come off as well. But put it on the cookie sheet or a sheet pan. Let's see what we have here. Just set it on the cookie sheet. Put it in the freezer, and once it's frozen, you can remove it from the cookie sheet and put it in plastic bags to store. And it will look something like another little cut. It'll look like this when you're done, and it's nice and fluffy. You can reach in and get a handful, and you have the frozen kale. And it really is nice to add to soups or to use in recipes all winter long. The next thing we're going to do is make some kale chips. And kale chips are kind of a popular snack item, and a lot of kids like them. And I'm going to just put some kale into a bowl. Again, washed and dried in the salad spinner, so it's somewhat dry. And then I'll add some olive oil to this. These are easy and a nice snack, a very nutritious one at that. You could use salad oil if you don't like the taste of olive oil. We like it. It too is healthy. What I'm going to do is I added about a tablespoon and a half, and I'm going to mix it with my hands. And then add some seasoning. I'm using lemon pepper. If you wish, you can use salt and pepper or any other seasoning. Seasoned salt, salt and pepper. Mrs. Dash makes a lot of different seasonings. They're all pretty good with it. Then we're going to put this out in a single layer, as close as we can, on a baking sheet. And we'll bake it at 275 degrees for 20 minutes. If you're in a hurry, you can bake it at 350 degrees for 20 minutes, or 10 minutes, I'm sorry. We'll set the timer because I always forget otherwise. Now we're going to make a dish, a pasta dish with kale, and I'm going to start the pasta and I'm going to put it right in that kale water. And we'll give that about 8 minutes. And while we're cooking the pasta, and I used orchetta, which is little ears in Italian, I believe, and it's a firmer pasta, and it's very nice in this dish. So while our pasta's cooking, I'm going to heat up the frying pan and fry a couple pieces of bacon. Okay, our bacon is finished, and I'll remove that from the pan. It'll be nice and crispy. And I'll turn down the heat on the pan, and I'll add the kale into the pot with the pasta, which has cooked for about 8 minutes. We'll add 5 cups of kale to that, and into the pan we'll put garlic. This is several cloves of garlic, half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and sun-dried tomatoes. These are the ones we froze last time, and I have thawed them in about a tablespoon of olive oil. And we'll put those into the pan and stir those around for a few minutes. In the bacon fat. This bacon is quite lean, so there wasn't a whole lot of fat in it, but we just want to cook it a little bit. We're going to let the kale cook for about 2 minutes in with the pasta. Keep this on a low heat. Okay, the kale should be ready in the boiling water. The kale chips that we put in the oven should be done about now. And we'll take them out. These can be served hot or cold, and you'll see they're crispy. If you can hear them crinkle, they're all crispy, and they make a great snack, just as they are. And they practically melt in your mouth. Depending what seasoning you use, you get some flavor, and there's not a strong kale flavor to them. Again, they make a good snack, and most kids even like them. So there's kale chips for you. Remove the lid and drain it well. Shake it a little to really get the water out of it. And we'll add this to the frying pan. This is a fairly quick dish if you have everything set. We'll add a little salt and pepper. Season it, and we'll add some of the pasta juice, just about a half a cup. There was probably a little in with it. Cook it a little longer. And then we'll add the bacon, broken into pieces. Top it with Parmesan cheese, grated. and a squeeze of lemon juice. Just a little bit to brighten up the flavors. And there you have it. Pasta with kale, bacon, and sun-dried tomatoes. Makes a nice main dish, or it can be a nice side dish. It includes your vegetable and your pasta course. Thank you for joining me today for a walk in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and this is NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.